Hey everyone, this is the Digital Health Hackers podcast, and today I have Koushik from AWS, a very special guest. So, Koushik, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey Sidharth, thanks for introducing me and inviting me over to speak with you today. And for those who are watching, I'm Koushik. I currently work as a principal solutions architect at AWS India, and I focus primarily on healthcare and life sciences customers. Prior to joining AWS, I ran a healthcare-focused IT consulting firm, delivering projects for a number of doctors, hospitals, and other stakeholders of healthcare. And with that experience, I also co-founded a startup by the name of Health and we built MedEngage through that startup, which is basically a patient engagement tool that aimed to foster patient relationship management for all stakeholders in healthcare. Now, here at AWS for the last 4.5 years, I've been working with a number of customers, including that of Healthify Me, Medibuddy, and many more. And Sid, I like what you're doing. You're not only helping customers, but also sharing your wisdom. And I highly encourage you to continue doing so. And I'm also a big fan of your YouTube channel. So
Thank you, Koushik. So, I think at AWS, you've been working a lot on HealthLake, specifically the product that AWS has come out with. Fire first, probably the first fire first solution of AWS, right? So, what have your thoughts been so far, and like, who is AWS HealthLake actually for?
Sure. So, first of all, let me take a step back and walk you through why, right? I mean, personally, if you really see through this role, I got a chance to work with a number of healthcare focused stakeholders, both from internally at AWS, but also at customer side as well. Now, for example, I worked with Health AI team that basically built these purpose-built services, like including AWS HealthLake that focuses on healthcare customers. Now, on the other hand, I'm also a proponent of ABDM right from its time of inception, the first paper that we all read about. And let me tell you why I believe in it, right? So before I get into ABDM, let's all take a step back again and understand basic challenges of a CIO. Now, we also work with a number of CIO and IT leaders of healthcare providers, or perhaps any other stakeholder from insurance side, or perhaps from the other side, from research side as well. Now, their job is to always ensure they're able to keep the system up and running and also be able to connect system to be able to meaningfully interact. Now, for example, Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission or not, every hospital that I know of are building such a highly interoperable system, right? Now, interoperability is not just for the sake of claims or not just for the sake of transacting data back and forth between system, but it enables all these stakeholders within healthcare organization to understand what's happening and to be able to put things together and understand and improve patient outcomes and also operational efficiency. Now, I believe ABDM is built with such an aspiring vision to connect these fragmented dots not only at the facility level, but at the country level, perhaps also set stage for connecting across the region as well as the need, right? So that's why I like ABDM, and it envisions to simplify the problem of data handling, sharing, and storing in context of a patient or a user. And hence I've continuously worked with some of the customers from the early stage of ABDM launch on helping them build fire capable infrastructure to be able to scale on cloud, right? Now there were some challenges as well. Like for example, when you want to scale these kind of a fire workload yourself, then often customers end up either building that capability themselves or perhaps leverage some of the open source offering that we all know of. And the limitation is when you scale, they come with its own overheads, like, for example, managing the database infrastructure, managing the security, managing the data scale, and also the compute layer of scale. Plus, on top of it, as we all know, Fire has its own data format challenge as well, because if you want to use Fire for your analytics or perhaps for transactions, it's not meant for it. It's meant for interoperability more than anything else. So we've understood all of this, and that's how I think even internally, AWS HealthLake has evolved from being an analytics capability, from interoperable capability, to almost like it solves the data problem end to end for a customer. Now, I just mentioned briefly about how AWS is thinking about HealthLake and how we are also innovating on behalf of our customers, right? And building services like HealthLake for that matter. Before I get into HealthLake, we also have similar products, by the way, which focuses on healthcare, which is AWS HealthLake, that basically helps store, manage, and query genomic or any omic data for that matter, health imaging for handling medical imaging, and health scribe for real time and also processing of voice and converting them into structured medical entities as well, right? So these are some of our AI services built for healthcare. Now, going back to HealthLake, it is a fully managed service provided by AWS to help healthcare organizations to manage and make sense of data. Here is what some of the features it does. One, it helps you collect various types of health data, including patient records, lab records, and doctor notes. And on top of it, it also uses artificial intelligence to understand and organize information, even if it is like messy or unstructured format that we normally get. And finally, it also puts the data in standard organized format that's easy for a healthcare professional to use and analyze. And it also provides the tools for someone to search through the data and gain insights from it. Now, HealthLake is also designed, since you mentioned about the stakeholders, for various stakeholders. For example, for healthcare providers, hospitals, clinics, and doctors can use it to better manage patient information and to get like a complete view of a patient's like patient 360 view, right? And for life sciences companies, it can help companies on medical research and analyze large amounts of data and so on. For insurance companies, for that matter, it can be used to process claims more efficiently and get a better understanding of patient population. And it can also be leveraged by researchers to analyze large sets of health data to identify trends or patterns. So in essence, HealthLake is for any organization in the healthcare and life sciences sector that deals with large amounts of medical data and also want to make better use of this information, and it helps organization to store their data securely, understand it better, and use it for improving patient care or operational outcomes.
Got it. So I'm going to ask you a lot of tough questions today. Okay. So, AWS HealthLake, specifically, we have it launched in the US and India right now. And this is a very peculiar set of countries to launch for AWS. So in the US, it makes sense to have a FHIR-ready server, specifically given the regulatory requirements around a FHIR API, right? So in India, let's say for operational purposes, and we understand this concept of the health data platform, and we want people to put all their data into this one place that they can then use for analytics and so on. But why should they, let's say, use AWS HealthLake as opposed to just another AWS solution, like let's say Redshift, or maybe just a JSON first database, and then do all the analytics on that?
Sure. So I think this is a multi-part question, Sidharth. Like first, why suddenly India, right? When we know, like in US, the market is far more ready to adapt something like FHIR or HL7 for that matter. Agreed. I think if you really look at the commitment from AWS, we've been continuously working close with some of the government initiative from India as well, right from COVID to many other initiatives. You could see how AWS collaborated with India as a whole. Now, having the same mindset, we also worked internally to figure how we can also take some of the capabilities of HealthLake to India so that it can help this whole ecosystem accelerate their Ayushman Bharat and interoperability adoption, right? Because it's at the right stage, and I think some of us work very closely with Health AI team to kind of get that done. Now, really, why HealthLake? Now, the second part of the question is why HealthLake? Why not using a combination of service, like for example, maybe DynamoDB, or maybe for example a relational database plus Redshift for doing things? Yes, it can in theory work. Basically, we also had a solution which we have archived some time ago called FHIR on AWS. Basically, it's a combination of serverless features like Lambda, DynamoDB, and even OpenSearch or the then Elasticsearch for that matter within AWS. Now, if you really see what it does is what it did is, like whenever you threw a HL7 on a FHIR data, let's say if it is FHIR, then it just stored the data as is. It extracted some of the meta information and then indexed it and scaled. And even there, the solution, even though it is entirely serverless, scaling was a problem, and ingesting the data seamlessly was a problem. And also to take the meta information and some of the document reference to convert from unstructured to structured data was all a problem. So we started building a lot of Lego blocks to kind of achieve what we actually wanted to do. And hence HealthLake came into picture for that matter. So HealthLake represents a paradigm shift in how you manage healthcare data, and it offers a host of capabilities. I think for the sake of simplicity, let me just share a screen and talk about it. So, for example, you can understand it a little more. Just give me a minute. Yep, I hope you can see my screen. Now, as you can see here, Basically, HealthLake is in the middle where it also serves multiple use cases. One as a transactional use case, transactional fire server use case, and it also can be used for analytical use case. If you see on the left-hand side, the Amazon HealthLake exposes Fire APIs for receiving Fire format clinical claims data. Now, let's say for a hospital, they may simply have their data stored in relational database, right? And perhaps for some, they may have standard formats like HL7 or whatnot. Now, for those customers who are users who don't have standard formats, then ingestion itself could be a problem to standardize to a data formats like Fire. This is where we kind of partnered with a number of our APN partners, like for example, HiPass and many more, who has built these connectors natively that can be deployed in the respective customer accounts or can be consumed as a SaaS offering. Now, these solutions can take the data format as SIS, convert to Fire. And in fact, if you want to even do some profile validations, like for example, Ayushman Bharat has its own profile validation and different countries have their own validations. Now you can do that and push the data to HealthLake. Now, HealthLake also natively brings certain validation. And in fact, ABDM is one of the profile that HealthLake can be used to validate as well. Now that's how you ingest the data. Now, again, for before the data is ingested to HealthLake, now Fire is also subjected to validation, like I mentioned, and some of the other validation framework it supports is US Core, Karen BB, and ABDM, of course, like we talked, right? Now, we also support Comprehend Medical integrated for extracting medical information from these unstructured data. Like for example, let's say if you're storing a document reference with a text of unstructured data, could be like discharge notes or medical notes, right? Now it can extract those unstructured data into ICD-10 or RxNorm codes and also detect PHI entities. These can all be identified from the unstructured text, and the respective resource will be created and then be appended back to the Firestore itself. And when you query later, you will be able to access the data, right? And the data, the moment you push into HealthLake, is immediately available for Fire queries as well. Now, first you ingested the data. Now, HealthLake also offers you Fire APIs. So you can connect with your systems using something like Smart on Fire. It for now supports Smart V1 access specification, or can use IAM roles within AWS ecosystem. Now, customers can simply leverage managed Fire APIs to build interoperability application on top of it, right? Now, the moment the data is pushed into HealthLake, the data is indexed and also structured in chronological order. So this is very helpful if you're, let's say, building like a patient 360 view, because often healthcare systems are also disparate, and also the intervals in which you sync the data could be totally irregular, meaning you can sync EHR in near real time, perhaps from a claim system in a very daily or perhaps in once in 2 days sort of a manner. But end of the day, HealthLake allows you to put all of this data together in a chronological order. So you'll be able to make sense of the data much better, right? And finally, since the data is indexed and structured in the chronological order, it is easy and useful for you to build certain pipeline and also do some analytics on top of it. Now, HealthLake also offers kind of a near real-time pipeline where the moment you push the data into HealthLake, a subsequent data lake is created for you, and you'll be able to query right on top of the data, right? As you can see on the right-hand side, which is SageMaker and Amazon QuickSight. SageMaker is our ML, I would say, feature wherein which you can actually take the data from HealthLake and also do some model training and inferencing and whatnot. Likewise, in QuickSight is our business intelligence software, which can actually use Athena to query our data that is stored through HealthLake, which is available for you in Data Lake. So what I'm saying here is it offers seamless data ingestion and standardization capability, and it also offers comprehensive Fire support. And then it also helps you with data transformation and powerful analytics. So these are some of the unique capabilities that helps AWS HealthLake being a unique offering, or I would say more holistic approach for someone building an interoperability stack.
Got it. So definitely, I mean, this is the amount of ecosystem components that you're bringing together and having Fire in the middle and it working with all of these other things, that itself is a pretty unique proposition, right? Like that's a very good value offering. Now, let's say for people who are watching, they may be thinking about AWS HealthLake as a competitor to the other more popular Fire servers, right? So let's say be it Google Fire or Microsoft Fire. I think AWS HealthLake is one of the few offering Smart on Fire out of the box. So what would you say, apart from whatever you've said so far, which is the SageMaker, QuickSight, what other, do you have anything else that makes AWS HealthLake unique as a fire server?
Sure. So we talked about how you can seamlessly ingest the data using some of the partner I would say tools and whatnot. Likewise, it also allows you to basically convert the structured data into unstructured data into structured data more seamlessly. Like for example, for now it uses Amazon Companion Medical sort of a model that integrates with HealthLake natively. So as a customer, you can enable it. So the moment the data gets into HealthLake data store, it automatically sort of go and does the inference and stores the value back as an extension. So the extension, as you know, within Fire Resource, you can just choose. Again, just stepping back, it not only stores one of the top inference, it also gives an option of top few based on what API it calls and stores. So you, based on the threshold limit, you can choose to use which inferencing you want to use for your use case. Now that's one very unique feature. Another one is like the zero ETL, where the moment you put the data into Fire store, it automatically stores and it does certain pre-processing of the data. For example, it does certain level of unnesting and flattening of Fire. I've also listened to some of your previous comparison on like Open EHR versus OMAP versus Fire. And one of this limitation when it comes to Fire is the analyzing capability of the Fire as a resource itself, though it solves the problem of interoperability when it comes to analytics, and also even for consuming transactionally, Fire as a data source could get very complex. Now, for the analytics part, what we are doing is using some of our models. We are flattening the data and offering it in Parquet and Iceberg table. So you as a customer can directly go and run SQL like queries right on top of the data set and consume it in near real time, and all for you don't have to build any additional infrastructure. So just pushing a Fire data, you are transactionally ready and your analytics wise ready. And most important, like you mentioned, we also bring in this ecosystem of connectivity where HealthLake seamlessly connects with all these AI and also analytics service. I would encourage the audience to also take a look at one of our good demo in YouTube called Agents for Healthcare in AWS. If you really see, we have built generative AI based, I would say, chat experience for a different personas within healthcare. For example, a doctor can now ask, "Hey, give me latest medical condition of John 100." For example, a hypothetical patient. Now, the models can understand the instruction, Fire HealthLake, get the medical condition based on the query that is constructed, and summarize the whole findings and then give back as an answer. Now, in fact, we have built a very holistic demo where it used all kinds of purpose-built storage like health imaging and also health omics. But I see that is how HealthLake is far more used. So it is the integration and also the ability for you to seamlessly move the data back and forth is unique. And I also see pricing as another advantage because you don't have to provision any infrastructure unnecessarily, where you only pay as you go. Because the moment you go and provision a Fire data store is when you will start paying for HealthLake. And it also offers certain free tier. So I'm happy to answer more on that as well, Siddharth.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I think before we come to the pricing aspect, I want to talk a little bit about the transactional part of HealthLake, right? Because I know HealthLake is still a little early in the game. It's not yet fully rolled out everywhere. So there are a few limitations on the number of API calls that you can hit, right? So in this sense, like, what has your experience been? Is this enough for most of the use cases where you've used AWS HealthLake, or is this are these service quotas and are these API quotas something that users of AWS HealthLake need to be aware of?
Right. No, in very, very good question. In fact, even right now, I think a couple of months back, we did like an announcement on some of the, I would say, features we added to Health. Like we were keenly observing the market. As you rightly pointed, we were like incrementally adding features. Now we also work with some of our customers to help facilitate or add HealthLake as a capability for transactional system. But at that point of time, we observed that the transactional capability was a little limiting, especially in terms of number of requests per minute, like reads and writes per minute were a little limiting at that point of time. So that's when we kind of opened it up, and we recently announced a feature wherein, for example, now HealthLake supports data ingest, which is especially transactions per second up to 12,000 versus which was 100 earlier. and read TPS, I think, is up to 5K, which is again was 100 earlier. So we have revamped the whole underlying architecture, storage architecture, and now can support, like I mentioned, 12,000 transactions per second and 5,000 on read. Now, this change has unlocked several customers, such as, for example, MedHost and Cigna and many more. In fact, our very own Indian reference, which is ECA have also benefited greatly because of this transactional capability push. We are continuously investing and innovating on behalf of others.
Excellent. No, I mean, those numbers make me really happy, especially if that's available to the general public and they can start using it. Then I believe, you do have a very unique value proposition here, and nothing really comes close to it. So let's talk a bit about the pricing. I think you were saying the free tier and how you price AWS HealthLake. How do you price it?
Yeah, before pricing, I also want to add, I think being an early experimenter, I mean, I'm talking about you, being an early experimenter of HealthLake, you also mentioned some of the limitation in search parameters, which we kind of listened to and also added some of them in the feature. And a lot of search parameters have been added to HealthLake as a capability. So yeah, we are keenly working with customers who are actively using HealthLake, observing what is needed, and we are incrementally adding. Now, going back to your question on pricing, like I mentioned briefly before, HealthLake, like any other AWS services, pay as you go with no upfront cost. You are billed from the time you create the data store, which helps you to index all your information, right? And again, if you really look at it, you are charged by the hour of your data store, which includes data import of up to 10 GB of data storage and also a few thousand queries per hour across all your data stores. Now, we have few more components to the pricing. One is data store, like I mentioned. The moment you create a store, there is a pricing, and the data store is always running, and so you are charged by the hour. And then you also have charges for query. I don't know the exact unit economics of query, but you're also charged on the query. And then you also have additional cost if you have enabled integrated medical NLP. Please note, I think when HealthLake was launched initially, this medical NLP was a feature that was added by default to all the data stores, but now it is a feature that you have to request. This is still a feature not available for Indian consumers, but for all the other countries, you can just go and raise a support ticket to add this capability. And also fire export. You can also do bulk fire export, and which is metered at gigabytes as a unit. So basically, these are what it is. Since you're highlighting about the advanced and standard, now we have two different tiers, Siddharth. One is standard. Basically, standard is a tier which is like our, I would say, the first version of how we launched our data store. And advanced is a tier that I mentioned about revamping our architecture and data storage, right? Now, that's what we call as advanced tier. And now all the new HealthLake data store that are created are by default created with advanced architecture. So
Got it. Got it. And the queries are slightly more expensive than the standard, I believe. I think the other prices were pretty similar.
right,
And again, here I think the additional data storage after 10 GB is slightly different for advanced and standard.
that's correct.
Got it. Got it. Great, Koushik. I mean, you had a few other demos to show. I'm pretty sure, you. I think AWS is one of the few, again, along with a lot in the Fire community, who are taking these Fire data platform seriously, right? I just want to know your opinion. Like, do you think Fire data platforms or this Fire first approach will kind of disrupt EHRs and the EHR market? Do you see a different kind of EHR evolving out of this new approach as opposed to like the status quo that we have, which is like one vendor just comes in and builds everything, calls it a day and goes?
Absolutely. It's a multifaceted response I'll give you. I totally believe so. Fire could very well act as a backend, and it's my personal opinion again, because we are all aware that we have number of standards. In fact, going back to your video of comparing between OpenEHR, Fire, and OMAP, and how it can solve certain problems. It's not like it's this versus that. It's more like how it can complement each other and help us evolve with a common pattern, right? Now, that is how we are also seeing an emerging trend of number of government, for example, India, or even you take Australia for that matter, Malaysia and South Africa, and many countries are banking on Fire as a de facto standard. Now, it means now the whole healthcare system is going to build the interoperability, or I would say interfaces on top of Fire. Now, this paves way for healthcare stakeholders to one way or the other build this interface with Fire to exchange. Now, for example, There are limitations like we just briefly talked about now. Fire as a system to be able to use as a transactional data format or analytical data format could be challenging. But if you really use some capabilities of HealthLake on top, for example, it can overcome certain limitations to Fire. For example, Fire lets you store the data in totally unstructured data that could go totally unusable. Like I've seen, and in fact, this is something I want to also tell a lot of people who use Fire as a format to not simply use for the sake of using it, but also make sure you're you're kind of converting the data, transforming data to a meaningful structure, and then you store in Fire format. So that will become more usable. So using technology like HealthLake will help you transform the data from purely unstructured formats to structured format, thus solving one problem. And then using the smart right out of the box kind of a capability allows you to connect with your mobile apps and your web application. So improving your end user application. Now this will reduce the need for an end user to build transaction system, which could be additional cost for a startup, right? End of the day, healthcare, though is a very interesting domain and very impactful domain, it is also very punishing domain if you're not being very careful on how you're spending money and where you're spending money, right? So these are some of the areas where you have to pay money. Now, at the same time, it also allows you to interoperate, and thus, if you have certain layer for unnesting and also like flattening your data, this could very well serve to be an analytics platform. I'm not saying Fire as a unanimous answer for everything, but I see a future where Fire could be a very important factor to transform healthcare industry to what we see as a fragmented one today to a defragmented one to fragmented to a defragmented one today. And I see that many healthcare CIOs within India are strongly believing in that and is building towards that particular aspect.
Yeah, I mean, your answer regarding the fact that people are already expecting Fire, governments are already expecting Fire, and you have to do this interface anyway. So it makes sense. And I think we see, looking at a lot of the apps and some of the dashboards that you've shown me in the past, I think it's
Got my mind.
possible.
I was about to share that.
Okay.
All right. So basically, this is like just think of it, right? Now, you as a consumer, let's say you have some bunch of data and you want to immediately push to HealthLake. Now, the moment you push to HealthLake, like I mentioned, in near real time, the data is available for you to analyze. Now, we haven't done much here. Basically, we use another tool called Amazon QuickSight, which is our business intelligence dashboard capability, and it uses something called Athena in between for QuickSight to be able to connect with your data set and run queries and whatnot. Now, you can see this dashboard that I'm showing here, which is basically like a risk stratification or a population health sort of a dashboard. And this is all from Cynthia record, as you can see here, where we ran a population of 2,000 plus patients to really understand and calculate risk. And again, we all know the advantage of Fire, wherein you have lots of algorithms and models that are available to calculate risk and like, for example, various other use cases are available for you right off the shelf. Now, we have just, for example, calculate a risk for, let's say, a stroke for the given cohort of patients. And we are also looking at the hypertension, diabetes, and smokers. And not only that, we are not only having summarized dashboard, we can also quickly build like a patient 360 capability, wherein, like, for example, the whole medication history, condition, allergy can all be brought together because the heavy lifting of indexing, normalizing of the data has already been solved by HealthLake. Now you have to just figure out what are your KPIs, what are your business outcomes and patient outcomes that you want to address and build backward from that. That becomes far more easier. So this is a dashboard you can build in hours, if not, I think you can build in minutes also if you know the AWS ecosystem well. So I see this being a very important capability of leveraging something like HealthLake and Fire as a standard as well. So.
Excellent. Yeah, just the thought that EHRs can be disrupted by an AWS QuickSight dashboard in an hour is pretty interesting to me for sure.
Thanks, Sidharth. Yeah, I mean, in fact, there are a number of experiments and solutions that we are launching. I mean, maybe I can share some of this for your viewers later on the comment, which is a lot of GenAI based solution wherein you can interact readily with the healthcare data, not only with HealthLake, but also with our other data stores. And for example, the demo that I talked to you before, the agents for healthcare. For example, you ask about a particular condition. Let's say if you want to also explore if there is an active trial going on, it can connect with APIs like from clinicaltrials.gov and get the you can do like an analysis of whether this patient can qualify for it, and even enroll it for you and whatnot. So I think with generative AI on top of some of the capabilities like health AI opens up possibilities that are indefinite and you can do a lot of things. We are
Yeah,
very
yeah, I mean,
excited.
I'll definitely put all of these demos in the description below. So if you're interested, just check them out. So anything else regarding HealthLake and any other interesting, work you've been doing or any notable implementations that you want to talk about?
Sure. I think when it comes to health tech, we always started talking about Rush University because if you really see during COVID and at that kind of time, we started collaborating with Rush University from Chicago, where the hospital network is committed to addressing the I would say the equity and they were actually working on a specific project where they want to address the underlying causes of the 16-year life expectancy gap among minority and lower income residents of Chicago's West Side. So Rush started building some of the comprehensive analytics solution to identify this, and they called it HECAP, which basically is Health Equity Care and Analytics Platform. Now, this platform helped them to transform, aggregate, and also harmonize data. And HECAP also leverages HealthLake as a fire capability. And like for example, from India, we have ECA. Now, again, there is a very good blog published by our friend, the founder of ECA, Vikal, where he talked about how they migrated from one of the open source Fire server to HealthLake. Now, there are a few reasons for migration. One, the growing data volume. They reached 10 terabytes in quick span of time, and they're continuing to. And by the way, this blog was published last year, similar time, and they must be going way more than 10 terabytes at that point of time. And they also wanted to have a robust solution to store, manage, and retrieve patient data. And there are also limitations to manage this open source Fire server at scale, and also they want to improve read latency and also high concurrency support. Now, these were some of the factors for them to push mainly on the manageability of the server infrastructure itself. Because think of it, right? You are managing not only cluster of database, but also cluster of monolith server that has to scale in parallel for your request on demand. So, which is not these Fire servers are built for, right? So this is exactly where HealthLake was very much in alignment with their need. One, it is managed solution, right? It reduces the complexity of infrastructure management and it efficiently handles the concurrency. As I mentioned, we have increased the read and write throughputs to number of X's 120 and 50x. So there is so much capability now, and it's very seamless migration process for those who have GBs and terabytes of data. All we need to do is create an ND-JSON format, new line delimited JSON format, and push it into S3, and you can import it. Or if you have like a connector, you can use open source connector, like for example, Merge connector AWS, or use partner connectors like, for example, HiPass or whatnot, to move the data from your existing systems into HealthLake. It's one-time job. Once you're done, then you can then consume the data both for transactional and analytical use cases. And most importantly, HealthLake also helps you comply with some of the regulation. For example, it's already HIPAA eligible, and many other certifications and compliance regulatory requirements are already met for you. So it kind of helps you with compliance on the local regulations as well. And also, yeah, finally, like I mentioned, it allows you to connect seamlessly with number of our other services. So you will not only use HealthLake data for the sake of interoperability, but go beyond it and make sense of data for extracting outcomes and insights.
Got it. Yes, especially seems to be important as we move more and more towards value-based care. And the data is the fuel of all of this, right?
Yes. Absolutely. So, I mean, I'll not be able to name number of customers, Siddharth, but I can see number of healthcare providers from Bangalore, from Delhi, and many other areas are already actively experimenting with HealthLake. Now, I also tell you, I mean, it's not like you just take HealthLake, deploy, and magic happens. No, there has to be significant efforts, and because it's a shared responsibility amongst healthcare stakeholders. For example, now as a CIO, they have certain responsibility to build systems together. Now, CMO will have certain responsibility to extract insights and have the metrics ready for meeting the KPIs and whatnot. Now, from the insurance side, from the finance side, they have certain need. Now, they all have to come together and their systems have to come together, which means there should be some level of investment, not only from money, but also from time perspective and resource perspective, these healthcare leaders should take. So it's both top to bottom and bottoms up approach, which will only enable true transformation. Otherwise, this will all be in theory and we'll keep talking for years.
Got it. Got it. Thank you, Koushik. I mean, this has been really great. Anything else that you want to share before we end the interview?
Sure. A couple of thoughts, like I mentioned before briefly, hey, I mean, I know we are all really looking forward to build this true world of how we can interpret data in healthcare. We have all seen the advantage of how UPI disrupted the financial world, and for example, now how ONDC is reshaping the digital commerce. We have to believe that UHI or ABDM has the capability, and we as technologists and also stakeholder of healthcare should actively look at ways not to short circuit, like I mentioned, take the data, dump it into one format and bundle it as one resource and push it, rather to meaningfully use the data, extract, make it much more relevant for your use case and ABDM, and then push it to the ecosystem. So that way, I think it can be a collective success. So it's a shared responsibility. Let's all work together. And number two is we are all here. We are really looking forward to collaborate with, if you are a startup or perhaps a public, I would say, working on a public initiative or anything else, do reach out. We are very happy to support you in this initiative.
So this is Kousik Rajendran from AWS, and I will put a link to his bio in the description as well, along with all the other resources and references. I mean, I think it's great. AWS is definitely making a big step in making healthcare more accessible and equitable for a lot of people. And I really hope HealthLake becomes way more successful, and we are able to see it being used in a lot of other places.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sidharth. Thanks for the opportunity. And I would say, like I said, I'm a huge fan. Continue doing what you're doing and looking forward to future collaborations. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Koushik.